Okay, now I want to talk about some of the more advanced techniques about finding interesting stars, and one of the ways to do that is to learn your stellar classification and a bit of astrophysics. So, firstly, let's go through what all the numbers mean in stellar classification. Right. So here we are. We're looking at the star type, and we can see a letter, a number, and then some Roman numerals. The letter refers to the stellar type. So here we go. Let's go through all of them one by one. Class O's are the hottest, and as we go down this list, you get cooler and cooler. You've got the main categories Class O. Generally speaking, in this game, they're represented by big blue stars with violet halos. Then you go down to B, and that gradually transitions from violet to through green down to the more cyan colours and generally blue. They're slightly cooler, but they're still extremely rare. We're going to go through the rarity in a minute anyway. Then you've got the Class A's. They're generally speaking, as I'm sure you're aware, black and white they look. They're very white. They transition from the cyan down into the white. Then we start turning into yellow. We go from very bright yellow down to a more orangey yellow, then an even more orange, and then extreme orange down to red. Then we've got the brown dwarfs. That's the L, the T, and the Y. The L types are the ones that are basically, they're called brown dwarfs, but they're very, very red. You've seen them, I'm sure. Then you've got the T's, which are, again, brown dwarfs. They're not actually stars. They've not really got any fusion going on in their cores. You can consider them as like really hot gas giants, but they're still classified as stars. You can still jump to them. You can't fuel from anything below L, as you know. Then you've got the Ys, which are the coolest of the coolest stars. Then you've got the protostars. They come in many different shapes and sizes, some of them really bright, especially if they're going to be Herbig A, E, B, E stars. They can be the children of O's, they can be the children of B's, they can be the children of M's, so they're, they can be very cool, but generally speaking, they're going to be very young. The younger stars are always going to be the hotter ones because they don't last very long. So if you find a Class O, it's very rarely going to be more than a few million years old, because if it is, it's usually on its way out anyway, and it could be dipping into a Wolf-Rayet star type classification when it's starting to shed its outer corona and its outer layers and turning into an exposed core. Then as you get, say, into the A is already going to be quite young again, but F, G, K, they can be quite old. M's can be extremely old as the universe, and so can any of L, T, and Y's, which are generally speaking the oldest and longest lived stars in the universe. Some of them can last for about 1 trillion years. And then you've got the protostars, which again are always going to be young. Carbon stars can be anything because they're usually old stars anyway, so they're never going to be young, but they can be of any age really. Generally speaking, not too old because they're usually quite big. Wolf-Rayet stars are always going to be quite young because they are the final stages of Class O's and maybe Class B's. Then you've got the white dwarfs, which are basically dead stars, so they're going to be extremely old, but then again, don't trust the stellar forge engine too much. Then you've got the non-sequence stars, which represent the neutron stars and the black holes. Remember, you want to filter by them to find interesting things. So let's go to rarity. Now, Class O stars, you're going to find they're something like 0.00001% of stars are Class O's. Don't quote me on that, but it's something like that. So if you want to try and find a Class O star, very, very difficult. You'll find more of them in the core, and you'll find more of them in certain regions of space. So let's see if we can find one now. So here we go. This seems to be a stellar graveyard. It's got quite a lot of black holes and things, and you'll find quite a few bright stars as well, because generally speaking, if you're finding a stellar graveyard, then at least in terms of the way the stellar forge thinks the universe works, there used to be a big nebula here, and it forms a very dense nebula. It formed a lot of very hot stars that all died quite violently and produce a lot of black holes and neutron stars, and some of them are still going to be left, so you're going to find some Class O's here as well, more often than not. Generally speaking, Class O's are pretty much the rarest star in the same sort of way as non-sequence stars, although the Wolf-Rayet stars are even rarer. As far as we know in real life, there's only about 1,000 of them in any of the local group, including all the galaxies in the local group. We only know of about 1,000 in all of them. We don't even know of them, we just predict there's about 1,000. That's how rare they are, because they don't last very long. They only last a few thousand years. The bees are getting less rare. There's quite a few bees already here. We're actually in a stellar nursery, at least that's what I call it. I don't know if that's what it's really called, but the stellar forge engine produces these regions where you get a lot of bees, but if you go, say, somewhere like here, you're going to find less bees. but still enough that you'll find one occasionally. Class A's, yeah, then we're already starting to see quite a lot of them. And then if you stick in Class M's, probably the most common type of star of all. There you go, loads of Class M's. And then if we start adding these, then yeah, you've got everything. You might as well switch to realistic. So now I want to tell you one thing that's quite advanced in that case. Firstly, you can work out how hot and bright a star are just by looking at these numbers. So as I started off, you've got, if you look at a star, let's start with the first one, A8VB, that's a star, because it's before the comma, it's an entire star. What information is that giving you? So the A and the 8, the first part, tell you how hot it is. So A, as I've already explained, is quite a hot star. And then the second number tells you within the A group, how hot is it? So is it one of the hotter A stars or one of the cooler A stars? In this case, one of the cooler ones, because the larger the number, the cooler it is. When you get to 9, then you're on the coolest type of A star, and then if it goes beyond that, then we switch to, does anybody know what the next one is? It's an F. An F comes below A, strangely enough. If you want to know the reason why that is, it's just generally speaking because once upon a time we didn't know how to categorize stars, so we came up with a method, and then we realized more about how they work. We realized that the order should be something else, and in this case it was "Oh, be a fine girl, kiss me." Anyway, so that's one thing. Yeah, you can work out how bright a star is. So if you want to find an O0, that's literally the hottest type of star you can find. Next, we have on the right hand side of that some Roman numerals combined with another letter, and that tells you how bright the star is, because the brightness isn't always necessarily directly correlated to the heat, because you have really large stars as well that can produce even more light, and they're not necessarily going to be quite as hot as a smaller, hotter star. So again, it works in reverse order. The cooler stars have the larger Roman numeral value, and the hotter stars have the smaller. So for example, the hottest, brightest star you can find would be an O0, 0. So the Roman numerals can actually go down to 0, and that will generally be a hypergiant. It will be a massive, massive star. That is going to be class O, obviously. It's going to be burning hot. If you want to find one of those, good luck, because they're extremely hard to find. A good place to start would be some of these grey dots. These grey dots, generally speaking, are to do with the category of star in terms of the name. So as you can see, like you got a Blua IHIM OJ-I D9-6174. So these grey dots represent key parts of that sequence. Each word group, so grey Theo in this case, or you can have Floens or Blue IM, they represent an entire block, and I said I'd get onto that. And inside that block you have a convention of naming them. Generally speaking, the first 3 letters, in that case we're looking at a DT-G. Those are just sequentially count up across the block. You can't really learn anything from that, but it's the next letter you can learn something from. You see that D there? That D, generally speaking, represents the mass of the star, which is something that you can't necessarily get from the brightness of it. You can kind of infer it a little bit from the Roman numerals, but the way it works is it goes from A to H, A being the lowest mass of the primary star I'm talking about, obviously not the total mass. So the very first star listed, in that case it's the G, not the M. So it's quite massive, so it's D. It's not A, which would be the lightest, not B, not C, D. If you go to a slightly hotter star, like say this one, it's going to be maybe an E. It can also be a D, because again, there's a lot of overlap between size and heat, but E is even more massive. And if you find an H, like the nebula itself, for example, is huge, so the nebula itself is categorized as an H, and it's AAA because it's the very beginning of that particular row. I'm not going to go into too much detail. But now we have a technique that we can use to actually search using the galaxy map search field for the biggest stars inside a given sector or block, for example in the grey Theo one that we're in now. All you have to do, for example, H, the hottest one, can only have AA-A. So if you type in grey Theo space AA-A space H, and then just search through them. Each one of those is going to be, generally speaking, quite big. There are exceptions. And then there's only 8 other combinations for the G ones, which are shown on the screen now. So you search for EGY space G, and then keep pressing, and you'll get also big stars, and it's a good technique that you can use. Basically, I'm getting all this information from the RV Sonnenkreis thread. That's the name of his ship. The guy who came up with it is Jackie Silver. You should go to that thread and read it and try and understand how the whole naming convention works, because he's trying to decode it and he's doing quite well. The most useful piece of information that we got out of that is looking at that letter that is before the last group of numbers. You can use that to try and work out how massive a star is going to be, and you can use that to help you explore. So that is an extremely advanced exploration technique, trying to take into account the blocks. So this grey Theo block, trying to work out how the naming convention works and what you can learn from that, and trying to predict a route. The blocks themselves, as I say, they center around these grey dots, and usually a grey dot is either going to be one of the very smallest, lightest, or it's going to be one of the heaviest, hottest. So if it's going to be an AAA or an EG-Y or an FG-Y, or there's quite a few others, again, go back to that thread and learn it. I'm not going to teach you everything about all that. Then it's going to be a hot blue star. Otherwise, it's usually going to be a young, tiny protostar. So in this case, here we go. We've got a tiny little protostar, but it's a G, so that makes it quite heavy. I guess this is going to be one of the exceptions. So that G isn't necessarily going to be a hugely heavy star, but then again, we're not going to know until we go there. So, yep. Also, I do highly recommend that you go to the Wikipedia page and study the stellar classifications, because there's a lot to learn, and this game seems to take into account all of them. So an M is typical, but if it was, say, a carbon star, they come in various different types of carbon stars, the same with white dwarfs, the same with black holes. And you can learn a lot about what type it is. And to be honest, it's not going to make much of a difference to the way they look. It's not going to make much of a difference to the amount of cash you get for them in the game. But if you are an enthusiast, which I guess advanced explorers usually are, then the more you know, the better. And you might want to try and find one of the rare J stars, or one of the rare SM stars, or MS stars, or whatever. Then yeah, you're going to get a lot more satisfaction out of exploring. And again, satisfaction is extremely important, because it's a very tedious job exploring. It's one of those things that, you know, the astronauts have to go through. And to be a proper intrepid explorer, you need to be able to deal with the tedium of space. In case you missed part 1, click on screen to see advanced jumping techniques, including the swoop and scoop method, and how to get more out of your route plotter. Coming up in part 3, we will look at getting good at finding planet types and listening to planet sounds. In the final video, we will look at key bindings, as well as discuss some philosophy about exploration. So long, Space Cowboys!